Okay, so today we're going to be talking about some practical steps for doing shadow work. Why is this important? Everything that we have disavowed about ourselves, or everything that is part of our life but has been pushed to one side, goes into the unconscious, or what Jung called the shadow, specifically the shadow. Within this place is not all bad. It's not all the bad parts of ourselves. It's just all the parts of ourselves that we cannot see or that have been disavowed. They've been denied and pushed to one side. So this can be the dark stuff that we would expect: aggression, jealousy, rage, anything that we would consider ugly or not in line with our self-image can go into this space. But it can also be potential. It can also be power. It can also be strength. It can also be assertiveness, or skills can end up being in this space. What's never very clear is how to do shadow work that ultimately leads to what Jung called individuation and the creation of an actual living, breathing, thriving individual, as opposed to somebody who's possessed by their shadow and forced to live an unconscious life. From the shadow, we have shadow work that leads to, hopefully, individuation. And this is an ongoing process that runs for your whole life, is the key idea here. Shadow work, the shadow, the unconscious, being unconscious, through to individuation, through shadow work, is all about making that which has been left in the unconscious brought into the light of conscious awareness. It's very, very simple. I am a thing, a physical thing. So when light hits me, it stops light from passing through me. And what you see behind me is a shadow. So what is light in this cosmology, in the cosmology of the Freudian psychoanalytic landscape that in this particular case was particularly developed by Jung? Light is consciousness. Shadow is unconsciousness. Light is that which can be seen. Shadow is that which cannot be seen. Light illuminates things, and shadow is that which is not illuminated. So it's non-conscious. How do we actually do that? If we're talking about legitimately trying to bring things from our unconscious to our conscious, we have to know that there's a reason why these things were disavowed. The online world has a kind of a pop psychology view of Jung and a pop psychology view of shadow work. I'm not being sneering or patronizing. It's hard to read Jung. It's hard to read Freud. It's bloody hard to read Adler. I don't know who taught these people how to write sentences, but my God, they make them torturous. Jung's not too bad for it. Adler's the worst of the three, but it's hard. And these ideas are not easy to penetrate. When an idea is complicated and hard to penetrate, it's very easy for people to get the sense that they've grasped the idea when they haven't. It's easier then to go to a YouTube video about shadow work because you don't want to read it from Jung because it's hard, or an online article, maybe from Psychology Today or something, which is telling you half the story. It is all that which has been disavowed. It is all that which has gone from the light of conscious awareness into the shadow of the unconscious. It's that. It includes potential, because in our fearfulness, in our cowardice, in our risk aversion, we will not embrace our strengths and our powers and our skills as a means of self-protection, as a means of keeping ourselves, the thing that we are, in the shadow. So what you will hear people saying online very frequently when they've got their idea of Jung and their idea of shadow work from YouTube videos and memes is, the place to start with shadow work is anything that annoys you in other people is your shadow. Well, for a start, that's actually just not true. It's not something that Jung ever said. What it is a misappropriation of a Freudian concept called projection, where sometimes what human beings do is when there's something in themselves that they don't like, they push it out, they project it out and imagine it in the other person and force narcissistically the other party to hold their burden, their sin on their own behalf. But shadow work doesn't begin. You can't take that truth and then come to the conclusion that shadow work is seeing where other people annoy you and going, oh, well, you know, who smelt it, dealt it. Like, if you annoy me, then that's because I'm frustrated in something in myself. That's can be true, could be true, could even be projection sometimes. But it's a misapprehension to think that that's what it's all about. The way to do this, I think, that would be more helpful would be to say, okay, what makes me uncomfortable? What do I know I should be doing, but I really avoid doing it? What makes me uncomfortable? What are the things that I feel I probably should be looking at and dealing with in order to be a fully functioning adult that I avoid? You see, the New Age types and the hippies have made Jung their own. And I don't think they understand just how affected by the context and the culture these men were. They were pretty conservative as a baseline. Their actual worldview, by modern standards, was extremely conservative. It would be, you know, all the buzzwords that people hurl at others nowadays and accuse them of this and that crime against the orthodoxy. Most people who were around in that time, turn of the century Vienna, would have really failed by the standards of today in terms of what we consider to be politically correct and what we consider to be progressive and what we consider to be right on and hip and cool. They were not. They were very conservative. And I think that's missed. It's misunderstood. Jung wasn't a particularly socially liberal man. And it's one of the things that I missed, is that actually there is an implicit expectation of how people will act. And Jung never really gets too into it. Adler does, his contemporary, does get into it a little bit more. But there is an expectation implicit in the work of Jung that people, it's a naive expectation, and maybe it was truer in the time that he was working. Individuation is not from unconscious, puerile consumer to conscious, puerile, self-indulgent, narcissistic consumer. Individuation, Jungian individuation would have been from puerile, narcissistic, adolescent type consumer to fully fledged, fully developed adult who can and does take responsibility for their own life. It's implied. It's not really stated, because the people living in that time wouldn't have felt like they needed to state that. They would have just thought that's what everybody wants. Of course, you want to be a contributing adult. And of course, times have changed dramatically since Jung passed away. And people don't want to be fully fledged adults. So have that written into the coordinates as you try to do shadow work. There's an expectation that on the other side of this, individuation might not be the individuation that you want. Individuation might be being a responsible, switched on adult who's really handling their own lives, their own responsibilities, who's really dealing with being a human being fully and completely. This is around the houses way, as we're talking a little bit. When you're talking shadow work, you are in the realm of psychoanalytic theory, whether you like it or not. It's not a hippy dippy new age process. you can't really get away from psychoanalytic theory here. So if you take that right the way through to the intellectual children and grandchildren of Freud and Jung and Adler, you can come right the way through to people like Slavoj Žižek today, who is a psychoanalyst first and a philosopher second. And he's made his views on the unconscious, well, I was going to say he's made his views clear. He's not the clearest speaker in the world, but he speaks about it a lot. And he's also made perfectly clear that he doesn't think much of the modern obsession with trying to be happy. I don't think Jung was either. And even if you read the word happy in Freud, Adler and Jung, it doesn't mean today what it meant then. They're not talking about that. They are assuming certain things about what everybody would consider happiness to be, and it's shifted. Zizek himself nowadays says he finds happiness a fairly useless category, and I would agree. I don't think we should be focusing on happiness in the modern sense, nor do I think we should be doing what Slavoj Žižek also talks about, which is a kind of Western Buddhism. So we reappropriate Buddhism, misunderstand it, and basically we don't, there's a ton of people out there who say that they're Buddhists, or they'll have a little statue of Buddha in their house, and you'll say, what are the four noble truths of Buddhism, friend? And they don't know. They don't know the core precepts. They don't know the central tenets of Buddhism. What's the noble eightfold path, friend? Haven't got a clue. Haven't got the slightest clue. You ask them what karma is, they haven't got a clue. They get it completely wrong because they've not bothered to look. They've not bothered to study it for themselves. So we want to avoid, in this psychoanalytic tradition, spiritual bypassing. The majority of people who are talking shadow work online, who offer you drills for it, are actually offering you spiritual bypassing techniques, mental masturbation techniques, and not ego aggrandizing techniques, but ego pacifying techniques. That's not shadow work. Shadow work is really uncomfortable. Shadow work is unpleasant. If it isn't uncomfortable and it isn't unpleasant, I don't really see how we can claim that we're moving into the parts of who we are that have been disavowed and have remained disavowed throughout our entire adulthood, which is what shadow work is. Why was it disavowed? You can't tell me that you're going to grasp a part of your unconscious that you've disavowed your entire adult life and not experienced a degree of discomfort. It's going to be uncomfortable. My advice, when you want to start out on this, if you want to do it with sincerity and actually have it meaningful, my advice would be to start in the one place that nobody really wants to go to, which is with your feelings. It's with your emotions. How are you going to get a sense of where your unconscious is up to if you're not in touch with your feelings? If you wanted a divining rod, a dowsing rod to let you know where you are up to, it's your feelings that are going to do that for you. It's your feelings that are going to let you know where you're up to. So if there is shadow work that needs to be done around how you feel about your childhood or your relationship with your parents, the feelings would be the navigation system, the compass that would let you know, yes, over here is something uncomfortable, over here is a comfort zone, over here is somewhere that makes me feel anxious or makes me feel sad or makes me feel angry. This is how you can use it as a sort of a radar, an intuitive radar for where you need to go. So I created the emotional literacy technique, and I'm glad I did, no regrets, but I've come to realize that it's actually a little too much for some people. For some people who have been very, very numb to their emotions for most of their adult lives and are very, very, very frightened of their emotions, we actually need another process that takes us from terrified of emotion to able to talk about emotions, which is what emotional literacy is. Emotional literacy encourages you to be more emotionally literate, meaning that you can describe how you feel with better language and more nuance. By describing how you feel with better language and more nuance, you are able to map your feelings. You might say, well, how's that useful and what's that got to do with shadow work? If you don't know how you actually feel about a situation, how are you supposed to process it? And listen, don't feel bad about not knowing how you feel about a situation. Number one, I don't think the human brain is particularly evolved, because it's not really been necessary in terms of evolutionary survival pressures. It's not really evolved to monitor and to distinguish what your internal emotional system is. The human brain's predominant focus and predominant adaptation is for mapping the environment, so that you know where the calories are, so that you know where the dangers are, so that you can speak language, so that you can communicate and build relationships with other people. All of the things that have allowed humanity to thrive and for the human population to explode as it has done in the last 100 years. That's the effect of what our brain is adapted to. We can distinguish what our emotions are. We can map internally, but generally speaking, we're quite weak at that. We're not evolved for that, which is why we need coaches, therapists, and counselors sometimes, because, I don't know, the brain is very comfortable learning a language, learning a skill, maybe learning to hunt or prepare meat in a certain way, mapping a territory, learning about a new predator, learning how a new predator smells or sounds, or these are the things we're adapted to. We're not evolved particularly well to distinguish between anger and sadness, or resentment and fear. And you might say, well, then why worry about it? Because not being able to distinguish between resentment and fear, or anger and sadness, may be the difference that makes the difference between saving your marriage and losing your marriage, which could be the difference that makes a difference between 3 to 5 years of health destroying stress, or not, or repairing it and moving forward. Being able to understand how we really feel and map our unconscious and our emotions, I would say, is a critical skill. It's an absolutely critical skill. So I'm not going to talk about the emotional literacy exercise today. I've talked about that ad nauseum. If you know about it and you haven't done it, and it's been out for like 3 years, by this point I think we have to say you're probably not going to do it. Okay. No point beating ourselves up over it. If it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. Let me offer another exercise for you. Let's call this the emotional validation exercise. And what we're doing here is we're not even going to ask, what you feel? Because this is the point of terror, and it invokes a freeze response in some people. You say, how do you feel about that? Before we get there and start mapping the different emotions and how we actually feel about things, one thing that we can do before that, way ahead of that, is to do an exercise where we look at the fact that we actually have emotions and that those emotions are okay. So the exercise would be step 1. For the day today, you would say, today I had feelings. Step 1, today I had feelings. I had feelings. I experienced emotions. Step 2, it's okay that I had feelings. So you start with very, very gentle. And this is not a fully fledged exercise. This is prep work for the exercise of emotional literacy. So you start with writing down, journaling, today I had feelings. And you would say, okay, when I went to the supermarket, I know I was feeling something. when I saw my mum, I know I was feeling something. You'd list it in step one. You'd list the when and the where you had feelings, when and where. And you would acknowledge the fact that you felt something, when and where. Then you would say, it's okay that when I was at the supermarket, I had certain feelings. When I saw my mum, I had certain feelings. When I got that phone call, I definitely had feelings, and that's okay. And the third step is you would distinguish between feeling good and feeling bad. It's really as simple as this. So the emotional validation exercise is just 3 steps. You say that you had feelings, and then you say where and when you had feelings. You validate, you say, it's okay, I felt something, I'm allowed to feel something, I'm a human being, I have emotions, they're there to help me, they make me intuitive, they make me emotionally intelligent, they allow me to form a better map of reality, build stronger relationships with other people. It's good that I feel feelings. And then the third thing is, before you start distinguishing what an emotion is, you just say, that felt good, or that felt bad. It's as simple as that. So if you're very, very, very numb, this is a place to start. What felt good? What felt bad? You identified, step 1, that you had feelings today. You state when and where you had feelings, and with who. Let's do that as well. I was with Terry, I was at the cafe, I bought a cake, and I felt pretty good actually, because I like cake and I like hanging around with Terry. I didn't see Terry today, unfortunately. So you say, where was I? I was in Liverpool. When was it? It was 3 o'clock this afternoon. And who was there? Terry was there. What did you do? I had cake. I ate a cake. I ate a slice of cake. You know what I mean? Gluten-free, of course. And you say, I had a feeling about that. And it's okay that I experienced certain emotions about that. What was the feeling? Was it good or was it bad? Now, some of you will say, this is too easy, it's too simple. To which I would say, well, then you're a black belt in your emotional literacy, I presume. Because it can't be both. Emotional literacy can't be beyond the scope of what you can do, and then an exercise like this be too easy. What you're telling me is, Richard, you've asked me to do progressive overload on a deadlift, but my body won't let me deadlift. And I'm saying, okay, here's some yoga, let's get started so we can bridge the gap. You want to do shadow work. Number 1, you have to accept that it's going to be uncomfortable, because these are the things that you disavowed. You disavowed them because they made you feel uncomfortable. You disavowed them because they felt bad. So these are the things in the discomfort zone. These feelings dissed you, yeah? This is in the discomfort zone. And those things that made you feel good, like when you ate the cake with Terry, they're inside the comfort zone. Well, shadow work has nothing to do with this. Nothing. Even if the shadow work you're doing is there to make you grasp self-assertiveness and strength and power, it's not inside the comfort zone, mate. It's not there. Here is where the shadow is. Everything that feels good, everything that's in the comfort zone, nothing to do with shadow work. Nothing, never. Everything that felt bad, everything that made you go, ugh, that was uncomfortable, that's where the shadow work is, and that's what we need to be pursuing. So, just wanted to do a quick and simple one. I hope that was useful. This is your entryway into beginning to do shadow work. Once you've done a week or 2 weeks of emotional validation like this, where you get used to conditioning yourself, saying, okay, I'll admit it, I did actually have feelings today. Where were the peaks where I would say that was a feeling, that was an emotion? Oh yeah, in the morning when I spoke to my wife, I felt like this. And then, you know, when I got to work, I definitely was having a bit of I was definitely having an emotion about that. Say it, write it down. Acknowledge that when you were at work, where you had the argument with your husband, with your wife, or your kids, that you had feelings. You're not saying what the feelings are, you're just saying I had feelings. It's totally okay that I had feelings. I think some people are feeling phobic because they may have been raised in a childhood environment where they just were not allowed to feel. That was simply taboo. They were not allowed to do it. And then your third step is to distinguish what felt good and what felt bad, and then to take a look at what felt bad. Do that for 2 weeks. That's your prep work to beginning shadow work. That's your prep work to beginning shadow work. I should do this as a puppet, shouldn't I? If I did it as a puppet, then you'd listen. Hello, I'm a puppet dinosaur and I'm going to tell you about accessing your shadow. My name's Terry. I probably should finish work today. It's quite late here and it's showing. All the good stuff, all the good feelings, comfort zone, don't worry about it. Nothing to do with shadow work. Where the bad feelings are, that's where you want to pay attention. Your next step is to get into emotional literacy and to open the unconscious up. And say, okay, I didn't feel very good about that. I actually felt quite uncomfortable. That conversation with my wife, that little bit of conflict I had with my kids, the way they spoke to me, the way it was framed, what went on, I was very uncomfortable with that. It didn't feel good. Okay, didn't feel good. How did it feel? I felt bad. Okay, and then we bridge the gap between the emotional validation exercise I've just given you to full-blown emotional literacy. It felt bad. And if you looked on a wheel of different feelings, would you say, was it like a shame? Was it sadness? Were you angry? Did you feel humiliated, disrespected? Did you feel jealous? Did you feel so on and so forth? Did you feel despair? Did you, and you start plotting around the potential emotions and you go warmer, 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 that one. And then you write down, I felt actually quite saddened by that. And also I resented it. Oh, good, okay, good. Oh, we got somewhere. That's the shadow, because you disavowed it. We call it sweeping it under the carpet. I had a conflict with my wife today and I swept it under the carpet. Where's the carpet? Well, there's no light under a carpet, is there? That's the shadow. That's what, in Islam, the word kufar means. People think it just means infidel. It doesn't mean infidel. The root Arabic word means to hide. It was literally, in the root Arabic word, it was to hide something inside the earth where no light could get to it. And the idea, where it came to mean an infidel, is that you would be in denial of the truth, in denial of God, in denial of light, in denial of consciousness. So it fits here. Don't be kufar. Don't hide the truth. That will make you sick. That will make you twisted. Your shadow, if it's continued to be disavowed, will eventually come back and possess you. That's more of a Jungian than a Freudian idea, but it's part of Jung's genuine genius. It's absolutely true that these things don't just pop back up in strange ways, strange perverse ways. They possess us. And I think what we're seeing right now across the board culturally is shadow possession. We're becoming possessed by the things that we have spent decades, centuries even, generations denying. So it's time we did some shadow work, like good little boys and girls trying to grow up into adult men and women. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that was useful. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention. And I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Cheers.